The morning sun spilled across the city like warm honey, coating everything in a soft golden glow that made even the ordinary feel promising. She stepped out of the notary's office with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. The paperwork was done, the documents sealed, and her name signed in solid ink-black confidence. For once, she had made a decision for herself, calm, rational, and responsible. A decision rooted not in fear or compromise, but in the kind of quiet strength that only grows after life has thrown a person through enough storms to learn how to stand on her own feet. As she walked down the pavement, she could almost hear her footsteps matching the rhythm of her pride. She held her folder close to her chest, the stiff edges brushing against her palm, grounding her in the reality of what she had accomplished. She had taken care of what needed to be taken care of, something important, something long overdue. The breeze tugged at her hair, playful and soft, and for a moment she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. It felt good. It felt right. It felt like hope. And hope in her world was not something she allowed herself to feel easily, but today she embraced it. She walked toward her car parked beneath a tall peepal tree, its leaves whispering above her as if wishing her well. She smiled to herself, not a wide grin, but the kind that bloomed slowly from the inside, like a secret only she knew. Today would be a good day. She would go home, make a cup of her favorite tea, sit beside the window, and breathe knowing she had handled something important without relying on anyone else. It wasn't that she didn't have people around her. She did, but something about independence tasted sweeter now than it ever had before. She didn't know how to explain it, not even to herself. Maybe she had silently grown tired of feeling supervised, managed, observed, evaluated. Or perhaps she had simply reached a point in her life where she wanted her choices to belong to her and no one else. She started the car, rested her hands briefly on the steering wheel, and allowed herself a final moment of satisfaction before driving home. A moment when the world slowed down enough for her to savor the quiet victory humming beneath her skin. But life rarely allows victories to remain untouched for long. The road home was familiar. The same shops, the same turns, the same potholes she always complained about but never avoided. She hummed softly to the music playing on the radio, a song from years ago that she used to love. It felt nostalgic, comforting, almost symbolic of the full circle she felt she was coming into. When she reached home, she parked the car, collected her folder, and walked inside. The house was unusually quiet. She thought nothing of it. Maybe everyone was resting or busy with something. She slipped off her shoes, set the folder safely on the console, and stretched her shoulders with a relieved sigh. She moved toward the kitchen, ready to heat some water for tea, but paused midway when she heard faint voices drifting down the hallway. She frowned. Soft at first, like murmurs, but then slightly clearer. Both voices belonged to people she knew very well. Too well. She didn't intend to eavesdrop. She didn't sneak. She simply stood still, because something in the tone of their voices, sharp, deliberate, calculated, made her body freeze before her mind could react. She took a step back, not wanting the floor to creak, not wanting to alert them. The voices grew clearer as she moved closer, her breath catching in her throat. "Just make sure she doesn't find out yet," a voice said. Her heart lurched. She knew that voice. She had lived with that voice, trusted that voice, let that voice dictate decisions, sometimes against her own comfort, thinking it was for the sake of harmony. But harmony had never really existed, had it? Just the illusion of it. Then the other voice replied, lower but sharper. The tone of someone used to giving instructions, used to being obeyed. "She won't know. She never questions anything. You just speak and she follows. That's how she has always been. But this time, you need to make sure she signs everything without reading too much." A wave of cold washed over her skin. Without reading too much? Signing everything? What were they talking about? She leaned slightly closer, her breath hardly daring to escape her lungs. Her heartbeat felt like it was echoing inside her skull. "I told you she already trusts me," the first voice continued. "She won't suspect it. Once the documents are in front of her, she won't think twice. She'll just sign." "Sign what? Sign for whom?" Sign why? The room tilted slightly, and she steadied herself against the wall. Then the sentence that shattered her moment of pride into dust came through like a knife slicing through silence. We need her signature to transfer the share. Once that's done, everything will be under our control. She doesn't need to be involved in decisions anymore. Share? Control? Her? The words pierced through her carefully built calm like thorns, tearing through layers of trust she had wrapped around herself for years. Every instinct in her body screamed that something was terribly wrong, something planned, something deliberate. Her ears rang as the voices continued. And don't let her know about the notary papers she handled today, the second voice said. If she connects the dots, she'll start asking questions. Her chest tightened. They knew she went to the notary. They knew exactly what she was doing today, and they wanted to keep her confused. She felt a tremor running down her arms. Her fingers curled into fists without her intending them to. She took a slow breath, but it trembled as it left her lips. Suddenly, the weight of the folder she had set on the console earlier seemed heavier than paper alone. Heavier with implication, heavier with betrayal she hadn't even opened fully yet. She took a step back, eyes widening as she pieced together fragments of conversations she had ignored in the past. Small comments, glances exchanged over her head, the sudden interest in documents, the new questions about her assets, the casual way she had been asked about her savings. Had it always been leading to this? Had she been walking blindfolded into a plan created behind her back? Her throat felt tight, but she forced herself to stay quiet. If they knew she had overheard them, they would twist the narrative, make her doubt her own ears. They were good at that, too good. So she stood silently as the conversation continued. "We'll handle the situation," the first voice said confidently. "By next week everything will be finalized. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her." The second voice hummed approvingly. "She better. Otherwise things will get complicated." Complicated. A single word, yet heavy with warning, heavy with threat. Her palms grew cold. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. The notary, her moment of independence, her confidence, it all suddenly felt fragile. Was this what they were counting on? Her trust? Her silence? Her willingness to avoid confrontation? She stepped back again, this time deliberately. She needed distance. She needed to think. She needed to protect herself, even if she didn't yet know how. Without making a sound, she retreated from the hallway and slipped into the living room. She picked up the folder with trembling fingers and pressed it to her chest as if it could shield her from the truth she had just uncovered. The tea she had planned to make minutes earlier was forgotten. The calm she had felt evaporated. The pride she carried disintegrated like smoke. She sank quietly into the farthest corner of the living room, the folder still held tightly against her as her heart beat unevenly. She didn't cry, not yet. She didn't panic, not yet. She didn't confront anyone, not yet. Instead, she sat in silence as the truth settled around her, cold and heavy. The voices faded into another room, unaware of the chaos they had unleashed inside her. And all she could think, over and over, was that everything she had believed about the day, about her life, about the people closest to her, had changed in the span of a few overheard sentences. She had walked into her home carrying pride. She now sat carrying shock. And in that moment, she realized that something far deeper than paperwork had shifted beneath her feet, threatening to rewrite everything she thought she knew about loyalty, love, and trust. The house felt different now. The walls, once familiar and harmless, seemed to amplify every faint sound. The ticking of the hallway clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, even the distant thud of footsteps moving in another room. Each sound sank into her skin like an echo of the conversation she had just overheard. She sat motionless, the folder pressed against her as if it were the only thing anchoring her in a world that had suddenly tilted. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, staring at nothing while her mind raced in 100 quiet directions. The pride she had carried from the notary had not entirely disappeared. It sat deep inside her, dim but still alive, flickering with the faintest glow of resistance. But shock had spread over it like a thick blanket, making everything feel muffled and distant. She didn't move when she heard a door open somewhere down the hall. She didn't turn her head when she heard familiar footsteps cross the wooden floor. She simply sat there with her heartbeat hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A voice called her name, not suspiciously loud, but casually, as if everything were normal, as if nothing in the world had shifted. She swallowed down the tremor in her throat and responded with a steady tone she didn't know she still possessed. She explained she had just returned, that she was tired, and that she wanted to rest for a while. The explanation flowed out of her effortlessly, almost automatically, as if her instincts were guiding her to keep her discovery hidden for now. She wasn't ready to reveal that she knew. Not yet, not without understanding the full extent of what was happening. Eventually, the footsteps retreated, the voices faded, the house returned to that strange, fragile quiet that felt almost oppressive now. She closed her eyes for a moment and inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the simple act of breathing. She needed space, not physical space, but mental. A moment to think. A moment to sift through the tangled threads of confusion and betrayal that had wrapped themselves around her mind. She stood up slowly and carried the folder to her room. Closing the door quietly behind her, she sat on the edge of the bed and opened it with careful fingers. Inside were the papers she had signed earlier, the ones she thought symbolized independence, progress, stability. She read through them one by one, scanning each line with new eyes. It wasn't these papers they were worried about. It was something else. Something they wanted her to sign without question. Something they were planning to slip in front of her with the confidence of people who believed she would never resist, never argue, never doubt. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She sifted through her own documents again, reading every detail twice, sometimes 3 times. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was suspicious. These had been her choice, her arrangement, her right. But it was clear now that she needed to be more cautious than ever. She needed to guard her signature and her trust with both hands. She set the folder aside and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Memories flickered through her mind, small things that seemed harmless at the time but now glowed in a different light. The questions she had been asked recently about certain assets, the sudden enthusiasm to help her organize her paperwork, the innocent-sounding suggestions about signing things for convenience, the way conversations would sometimes pause when she walked into the room. Individually, they had meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. A pattern she had been too trusting, too distracted, or too hopeful to see. Her eyes stung as she realized how deeply she had believed in the promise of harmony. She had always chosen peace over conflict, silence over confrontation. She had always convinced herself that asking questions would make her look distrustful, ungrateful, dramatic. So she had swallowed her doubts, ignored her instincts, and pretended everything was fine. But now, everything inside her was telling her the same thing. Trust had been used as a tool against her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, gathering the courage she didn't know she would need today. The pride she felt at the Notary had given her a taste of autonomy. She needed to hold on to that feeling now, even if it trembled inside her like a candle in a storm. A knock sounded on her door. She stiffened instantly. Her voice, calm but distant, responded with a quiet yes. The door opened just a little, and a familiar face peeked inside with a polite, hesitant smile. The kind of smile people wear when they want to seem gentle, concerned, or casually affectionate, while hiding something underneath. She had seen that smile before. Too many times. "You're back already?" "How did it go?" the voice asked warmly. "It went fine," she replied with measured softness. "Just a long day. Did you sign everything?" The question was casual on the surface, but the undertone was unmistakable. Curiosity mixed with the faintest trace of calculation. "Yes," she answered, keeping her eyes neutral. Everything was in order. "That's good to hear," the voice responded with that same practiced smile. "You always handle things so responsibly. You make everything so easy for us. Easy for us. Us." The word landed like a stone in her chest. She forced a gentle nod. "I try." The conversation drifted into harmless small talk, the kind that skimmed the surface without touching anything real. She answered politely, matching tone for tone, but inside she was studying every movement, every glance, every carefully chosen word. She no longer saw familiarity. She saw strategy. She saw intent. She saw someone who believed she remained blissfully unaware. Eventually, the door closed again, leaving her alone in the quiet room. She waited for a full minute before letting out a slow, shaky breath. She felt drained, not physically but emotionally. Acting unaware was harder than she expected, but she had to do it, for now. When she finally got up, she walked toward the window and pushed the curtains aside. The sun was lower now, casting long, stretched shadows across the neighborhood. Children played in the street. A vendor pushed his cart of roasted corn past the gate. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life outside went on as usual, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her home. She rested her forehead against the cool glass. She needed a plan, not a panicked reaction, not a confrontation fueled by emotion. She needed a strategy, quiet, deliberate, and sharp. She had to understand what they were planning before she could protect herself from it. She stepped away from the window and sat at her desk. She opened a notebook and stared at the blank page. The tip of the pen hovered above the paper for a long moment before she began writing down everything she remembered. The exact words she heard, the tones, the implications, the timeline they mentioned. She wrote down the strange events from the past month that suddenly made sense when viewed through this lens. She wrote down every detail, no matter how small. The more she wrote, the more her heart ached. But she kept writing. She needed clarity, and clarity required honesty, even when the truth hurt. When she finished, she stared at the filled pages. Her handwriting, normally steady and neat, was uneven in places. But her thoughts were clearer now. They wanted her signature for something she had never been told about, something they had designed without including her, something meant to give them control over decisions that should have belonged to her as well. She took a deep breath and closed the notebook. The plan forming in her mind was slow but certain. She would observe them, quietly, attentively. She would ask subtle questions. She would pay attention to every document placed in front of her. And she would not sign a single thing without reading it thoroughly, no matter how much pressure was applied. She wasn't naive anymore. Not after today. She put the notebook away and walked to the kitchen. She needed that cup of tea now more than ever. She boiled water, the simple domestic sound oddly comforting amid her spiraling thoughts. She poured the steaming liquid into her cup, adding sugar slowly, watching it dissolve. When she sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warmth of the cup, she felt a shift inside her. Not dramatic, not visible, just a quiet strengthening of her spine. A subtle awakening. She wasn't breaking. She wasn't shattering under the weight of betrayal. She was processing, learning, adapting. As she sipped her tea, she listened to the sounds in the house with new awareness. The footsteps, the distant chatter, the occasional cough, the opening and closing of drawers. All ordinary sounds, but now layered with meaning. Later in the evening, she noticed something small but telling. A document had been placed on the dining table. She recognized the handwriting on the sticky note attached to it. It was a reminder for her to look through it when you get time. Her breath caught. She waited until the house settled into the lull of late evening before approaching the table. She picked up the document, turning the pages slowly. It wasn't what she overheard them discussing, not yet, but it was a related matter. Something financial, something that seemed harmless on the surface but carried implications she would never have understood before today. She set it down carefully and returned to her room. Her suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were confirmations. The plan wasn't just an idea, it was already in motion, and she was expected to move along with it silently. But today had changed her. She was no longer walking in the dark. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling once more, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. Her mind was caught in a delicate balance between past trust and present truth. She felt the weight of the upcoming days pressing on her, like a shadow stretching across the floor. She didn't know exactly what she would face. She didn't know how deep their plan ran or how far they were willing to go. But she did know one thing, and it was the only thing that gave her strength as she slowly drifted into a restless sleep. She would not be the silent, obedient figure they believed her to be anymore. She would not sign blindly. She would not be manipulated. She would not allow her future to be shaped by people who planned behind her back. The quiet before the storm had settled, and deep inside her, something unshakable had begun to rise. Morning arrived quietly, sneaking into her room through a thin gap between the curtains. A soft, muted light filled the space, brushing against her face and pulling her slowly into consciousness. She blinked through the haze of a restless night, her mind instantly aware of the weight that had settled there since yesterday. It hovered behind her eyes like a storm cloud, heavy and cold. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples as if she could massage away the memories of the overheard conversation. But the memories clung to her tightly, refusing to fade, every word replayed with painful clarity. She swung her legs off the bed, her feet touching the cool floor. For a moment she simply sat there, gathering strength, letting her breathing settle. There was no luxury of denial left, no room for comforting illusions. She could no longer afford to pretend everything was normal, because nothing was normal anymore. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked toward the mirror. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, tense jaw, a faint shadow of worry etched across her forehead. But beneath all that, something else was emerging, a quiet determination. A fire sparked by betrayal, yes, but fueled by clarity. She brushed her hair, tied it neatly, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was awake. She could hear movement in the kitchen, soft clinks, the shuffle of slippers on tile, the low murmur of voices. She paused just before entering, letting her expression smooth into calm neutrality. When she walked in, both faces turned to her with practiced smiles. She returned the gesture gently, careful not to reveal the subtle change within her. "Morning," she said with soft warmth. "Good morning," one of them replied, placing a plate on the table. "You're up early." "Just couldn't sleep well," she said simply, taking a seat. Sympathetic noises followed, the kind people make when they want to seem concerned. But now she heard the hollowness beneath it, a performance, a facade. Still, she played along. Breakfast passed quietly enough. They asked how her appointment went again, probing gently, watching her with eyes that wanted reassurance she was unaware. She answered calmly, evenly, offering no cracks in her composure. Inside, she was analyzing every word spoken. After breakfast, she excused herself and stepped outside onto the veranda, letting the air fill her lungs. The morning felt crisp. Early dew glistened on the leaves of the plants she watered daily. A sparrow hopped along the railing, chirping innocently, unaware of the heaviness simmering inside her home. She wrapped her arms around herself and leaned on the railing. She needed information, clarity, proof, anything that confirmed the full scope of their intentions, and she had an idea. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed an unusual interest in her schedule. Questions that had seemed casual then. When are you going to the bank? Do you need help with your documents? When is your appointment? Are you handling your savings alone? Who manages your paperwork? At the time, she thought they were being supportive. Now she knew they were gathering information to plan around her movements. If they had been watching her schedule, maybe they had also been preparing documents somewhere in the house, something they planned to put in front of her soon. She went back inside, her heart beating steadily. She didn't want to snoop. That wasn't who she was. But now she wasn't trying to uncover harmless secrets. She was trying to protect herself. She began with subtlety. First, she checked the living room. Drawers, shelves, cabinets, everything looked normal. Then she moved to the dining area. Nothing unusual except for a stack of papers she already knew about. Then came the study room. Her hand hesitated at the door before she pushed it open. The familiar scent of paper and ink greeted her. The study was always neat, but today something felt slightly off. The desk was clean, but one of the drawers wasn't fully closed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it open. Inside there were documents neatly stacked. Some were personal, others financial. She sifted through them, careful to leave no trace of her search. Most were routine household papers. But then she found a brown envelope tucked beneath a stack of older files. Her breath caught. She lifted it slowly, feeling the weight of it in her hands. When she opened it, her stomach twisted. Inside were photocopies of her ID, her signatures from various forms, and drafts of legal documents she had never seen before, documents that would give others control over decisions she had every right to make herself. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay still. Some drafts were incomplete, some already had portions filled out. All of them required only one thing to become valid, her signature, and they had copies of it. A chill ran through her spine. She scanned the papers carefully, memorizing every detail she could before slipping them back exactly where she found them. She closed the drawer quietly and stepped back from the desk, her chest tightening with each heartbeat. Her suspicions were no longer a shadow. They were reality. They were creating documents for her to sign, documents they planned to pass off as routine, documents that would take away her authority, her rights, her independence. She walked out of the study, her hand pressed against her heart as if trying to calm its frantic rhythm. As she moved through the hallway, she felt watched, even though no one was there. Maybe it was just anxiety, maybe it was instinct, but she sensed an invisible presence of intentions she had once trusted now twisted into something harmful. She returned to her room and closed the door softly. Her hands trembled as she leaned against it, breathing deeply until her heartbeat slowed. Then she walked to the bed and sat down, staring at the wall. She needed help. Not confrontation, help. Someone outside the circle. Someone unbiased. Someone who didn't have a stake in her vulnerability. But who? A friend? She hadn't kept many, not close ones, at least not recently. She had allowed herself to become isolated, comforted by the illusion that those around her were enough. A cousin? Possibly, but she wasn't ready to expose family turmoil unless absolutely necessary. A lawyer? That idea struck her with clarity. A professional, someone who understood legal documents, signatures, authority, someone who could explain what these drafts meant and what risks they carried, someone who could advise her without judgment or emotional entanglement. The idea steadied her. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She remembered the lawyer she had met a few months earlier at a community event. They weren't close, but they had spoken kindly, offering help if she ever needed any legal guidance. She had taken the number, not knowing she would one day need it desperately. Her finger hovered over the contact. Would calling raise suspicion? Possibly. But she could step out for a routine errand. No one questioned those. She could say she needed photocopies, groceries, a brief walk, anything. She took a deep breath and sent a short message. Hello. I need to discuss some documents. It's important. Are you available today? Within minutes the reply came, of course. I can meet you at my office in the afternoon. Is everything all right? She stared at the words for a long moment before responding. I'm not sure. I'll explain when I come. Her hands felt cold when she set the phone down. Now she needed to act normally. Now she needed to wait. Now she needed to pretend she was completely unaware of what brewed beneath the surface of her home. The rest of the morning passed in a tense blur. She completed routine chores, answered questions casually, smiled when expected. She kept her tone light, her posture relaxed, her eyes calm. No one suspected anything. At one point, she saw them huddled near the study room, speaking quietly. She didn't approach, but she watched from a distance. Their expressions were serious, focused, determined. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The plan was moving forward. By midday, she prepared to leave the house. She picked up her bag and slipped her notebook inside, along with the knowledge she carried from the study room, because the papers themselves were too risky to take. I'm stepping out for a bit, she announced casually. I need to get some things. Oh? Want someone to go with you? One of them asked too casually. Her heart skipped. No, she replied with a small smile. Just a quick errand. I'll be back soon. They watched her for a moment longer than comfortable, then nodded. All right, take your time. She stepped out, walked calmly to the gate, closed it gently behind her. But the moment she was out of sight, her steps quickened. She walked briskly down the road until she reached the main street where she could take a rickshaw. Her hands trembled slightly as she climbed in. When she reached the lawyer's office, she felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She entered the cool, quiet room and sat opposite the lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. Someone who carried authority not with force, but with confidence. "What happened?" the lawyer asked gently. She hesitated only for a moment before the words spilled out. Carefully, steadily, every detail she had witnessed, every word she overheard, every document she found. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She told the story with a clarity she didn't know she possessed. The lawyer listened without interrupting, her expression shifting slightly as the story unfolded, from concern to disbelief to a quiet, simmering seriousness. When she finished, the room felt heavier. The lawyer leaned forward. "How long has this been going on?" she asked softly. "I don't know," she replied. "I only realized yesterday. Did they attempt to make you sign anything recently?" "Not yet, but they're preparing." The lawyer nodded slowly, tapping her pen against the desk. "Legally, no one can pressure you to sign anything, and any document signed under manipulation or misrepresentation can be challenged. But you must be extremely cautious." She swallowed. "I am." The lawyer took a breath. "You need to protect your documents, your signatures, and your independence. Do not sign anything. Do not let them present papers suddenly. And if they try to create a pressured situation, call me immediately." She nodded, relief washing over her. Someone believed her. Someone understood. Someone was on her side. The lawyer continued, voice firm now. "From what you described, they may be attempting to gain decision-making authority over your assets. That is serious, but you are not powerless. You can protect yourself legally if needed, and you have already done the most important thing. You became aware." Tears pricked her eyes, not of sadness, but of validation. "I was afraid I was overthinking," she whispered. "You weren't," the lawyer said quietly. "You trusted your instinct, and your instinct was correct." The meeting lasted an hour. By the end of it, she had a plan, one stronger, clearer, and safer than anything she had imagined alone. She knew her rights, she knew the warning signs, she knew the legal pathways available to her. When she stepped out of the office, the sun was high, warm against her skin. She took a long breath and felt steadier, stronger, sharper. She wasn't returning home blindly anymore. She was returning with awareness. She was returning prepared. She walked back to the rickshaw with her spine straighter than it had been in years. She wasn't the same woman who had left the house earlier that day. And she certainly wasn't the same woman who had accidentally overheard whispered plans the day before. The house felt unusually quiet the next morning. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet that comes after a restful night. It was the heavy kind, the sort that lingers after an emotional storm that no one talks about. The kind that settles over everything like a dull film, coating even the air with tension that refuses to lift. I woke earlier than usual, not because I had rested well, but because sleep came and went in thin, fragile layers all night. Every time I closed my eyes, fragments of the conversation I had overheard the day before surfaced again. The hushed tones, the shifting footsteps, the unmistakable edge in the voices as they discussed plans that clearly did not include me, or worse, were designed to move around me as though I were nothing but an obstacle. The memory dragged itself along the edges of my thoughts like a thorned vine, catching every time I tried to move mentally to something else. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the kettle as it heated water for tea. The small metal object hissed and rattled like it were protesting being awake this early. I envied it for its simplicity. It only had one job: heat the water, whistle if necessary. No doubts, no second-guessing, no betrayal that needed to be unpacked. I wrapped my arms around myself as I leaned against the counter, not because the room was cold, but because my body instinctively craved grounding. Something familiar, something steady, something that wouldn't shift beneath my feet the way everything else had begun to. The tea boiled, and I poured it into a mug, watching steam curl upward in delicate spirals. I inhaled deeply, the scent offering small comfort. But comfort wasn't enough, not anymore. As I stood there, I found myself replaying the exact moment I walked into the house the previous day, the lightness I had felt after returning from the notary, the sense of accomplishment, of finally doing something meaningful for myself. My chest tightened as the contrast hit me again. The shift from pride to betrayal had been so swift it was almost surreal. I silently wondered how long those plans had been in motion, how many conversations had taken place without my knowledge, how many decisions about my life, my home, my future, had been made by voices that weren't mine. The thought stung at first, then burned. I lifted the mug to my lips, took a slow sip, and let the warm liquid settle in my chest. For a brief moment, it steadied me. But then the sound of footsteps upstairs pulled me back into the present. Slow, measured, careful steps. I knew those steps. I knew the weight behind them. I knew the hesitations, the pauses, the way they seemed to shift direction ever so slightly when uncertain. And this morning, there was uncertainty. There was awareness, too, a sense that something felt off. Of course it did. People always sense tension even when no one says a word. I didn't move. I stayed exactly where I was, holding my mug with both hands as if it were an anchor, keeping me from drifting into panic. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, then paused. I could almost hear the thought forming. Should he come down? Should he speak? Was something wrong? Did I sense what I wasn't supposed to? I stared into my mug instead of answering the silent questions drifting between floors. Eventually, the footsteps resumed, coming down step by step until they reached the last one. I kept my expression neutral, controlled, quiet. When he entered the kitchen, the air shifted again. He said, "Good morning." I responded politely, without warmth but without coldness either. I gave nothing away. Not yet. He watched me for a moment, longer than usual. He was trying to read me, trying to decide if anything was out of place, if I had overheard anything yesterday that I shouldn't have. I kept my silence steady and smooth like a shield. After a while, he moved about the kitchen, acting normal, or trying to. There was a stiffness to his movements, a forced rhythm. It was a performance, but I didn't applaud. Instead, I watched quietly, analyzing every shift, every pause, every little glimmer of guilt that flickered in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. When he finally stepped out of the kitchen, I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I took another sip of tea and forced myself to think, not emotionally, strategically, because the truth was painfully clear now. The time for taking people at their word was over. The time for assuming good intentions simply because they were comfortable was gone. Something had been planned behind my back. Something that involved me, but not for my benefit. And if I pretended nothing had happened, those plans would continue unfolding, step by step, until they swallowed the life I had been building and replaced it with something else, something I had never agreed to. No, I would not let that happen. But I couldn't act abruptly either. I had to be cautious, deliberate, measured. One wrong move and the situation might shift in a direction I wasn't ready to handle. As I stood there, sipping tea in a quiet house that suddenly felt unfamiliar, I realized something important. Everything had changed, and I needed to change with it, not loudly, not impulsively, but with the same precision I had shown at the notary office, the same intentionality that had made me feel proud only a day before. The plans made behind closed doors had been hidden. Mine would be quiet, but not hidden from myself. A small spark stirred in my chest, determination. I didn't know what the next steps would be yet, but I knew this. I would not stand still and let someone else design my life in whispers. Not anymore. The late afternoon sun was warm against my skin as I stepped out of the notary's office, a neatly stamped folder tucked safely under my arm. The glass door clicked shut behind me with a decisive sound, one that somehow felt symbolic. It was the kind of click that suggested closure, certainty, and the start of something I could finally claim as my own. I paused at the bottom of the steps and inhaled deeply. The air smelled like sun-heated pavement, a hint of jasmine from the shop next door, and the faintest trace of freedom. I felt good. No, I felt proud. It wasn't often that I left a place feeling like I had done something entirely for myself, something that wasn't tied to anyone else's expectations, limitations, or quiet disapproval. The notary's office had been a small square room, with walls lined in certificates and dark wooden shelves, but walking out of it felt like stepping into a wider world. The document I carried wasn't extravagant. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of paperwork people posted online with triumphant emojis and captions. But for me, it meant something I had been craving for a long time: certainty. It meant autonomy, clarity, and a solid piece of ground beneath my feet in a life that had felt unsettlingly unstable for months. I walked toward my car, feeling the small weight of the papers as though they were a medal I had earned. Each step held a little more confidence than the one before it. I unlocked the door and slid inside. For a few moments I just sat there, letting the quiet settle around me. My fingers traced the edge of the folder absent-mindedly, a soft smile curling at my lips. I hadn't felt this kind of calm satisfaction in years. Maybe things were finally shifting in my favor. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. Maybe I was finally reclaiming pieces of myself I had been forced to set aside. The drive home was peaceful. Music played low on the radio, something soft and mellow, matching the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. The sun dipped lower as I got closer to our neighborhood, casting a golden glow across the rows of houses, as though the world itself was blessing this new chapter I had just opened. I parked outside the house and sat for a moment longer, letting myself savor the last few seconds of pure, uncomplicated pride. I deserved this feeling. I had worked for it. I had fought quietly for it. And most importantly, I had earned it without anyone's guidance, approval, or influence. With that comforting thought, I opened the car door and stepped out, my grip tight on the folder but my spirit light. As soon as I walked toward the front door, I heard faint voices inside. Nothing unusual, just the low murmur of conversation. It was the tone that caught my attention, a certain sharpness, a certain secrecy. It was the kind of tone people used when discussing things they didn't want others to hear. I turned the doorknob slowly, my steps naturally quiet. I wasn't sneaking. I simply walked in the way anyone would when arriving home after a long day. But the moment I entered, the voices sharpened, lowered, then paused, as though someone had pressed a mute button too late. The hallway was dim, lit only by the late sunlight filtering through the living room curtains. I stepped softly into the house, hearing the faint rustle of movement from the other side of the doorway. Someone shuffled. A whisper followed, rushed and urgent. I froze, not because I wanted to listen, but because the silence after the whisper felt heavy and wrong, as though the air itself were holding its breath. And then I heard it, clear, unmistakable. A voice saying something I was never meant to hear. A plan that involved me. A plan spoken in low, confident tones, as if my life were nothing more than a set of logistics being arranged behind my back. The words fell one by one, sharp as blades, slicing through the fragile bubble of peace I had carried from the notary's office. My heartbeat quickened. My grip tightened around the folder. I didn't move forward, not yet. I didn't make a sound. I simply stood there, absorbing each sentence as it drifted from the living room, each one worse than the last. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was disbelief. Then confusion. Then the soft, sickening realization that everything I thought I understood about the last few weeks had been a carefully folded lie. The pride I'd felt only minutes earlier drained from my body like water spilling through cracks. The steady confidence I had carried with me from the notary's office trembled and slipped away. I listened in stunned silence as the conversation continued, voices weaving plans, decisions, assumptions, none of which included my presence, my consent, or my knowledge. The room seemed to dim around me, the air thickening. My palms felt sweaty against the folder I still held too tightly. My stomach dropped, twisting in a way that made it hard to breathe. And then, laughter. Soft, dismissive laughter, as though everything being discussed was so obvious, so simple, so expected. A moment of pride became a moment of devastation. I took a step back, silent, unseen, my pulse echoing in my ears. The folder against my chest felt heavier now, not like a metal, more like a weight dragging me down. I swallowed hard, feeling something sharp building behind my eyes, but no tears came. I was too stunned for tears. The conversation continued, unraveling more truth than I was prepared to handle. Every sentence shattered a piece of the fragile trust I had been holding on to. Every careless joke, every assumption, every manipulative line built a picture I couldn't look away from. When the voices paused, I turned and quietly walked back toward the door, not to leave, but to breathe, to collect myself, to stop the panic rising inside me. My fingers trembled as I touched the doorknob. The world outside looked the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but everything inside me had shifted violently. How quickly everything could change, how fast pride could dissolve, how suddenly peace could shatter. I closed the front door softly, careful not to make noise. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and let one slow exhale escape me. I felt the truth settle heavily in my chest, whatever I thought I understood, whatever stability I believed I was building, whatever trust I thought still existed. It had all been a mirage, and now I had heard something I could never unhear, something that would change everything, something that would force me sooner or later to choose between silence and survival, between pretending and protecting myself, between loyalty and self-respect. The sun had been warm when I left the notary's office, but by the time I stepped fully into my own home, the warmth inside me had been replaced by a cold, quiet storm, and I knew this was only the beginning.